Get out of my kitchen. You're just a burden here now." Those words came from my own son's mouth. Standing in the kitchen of the house I had worked 3 jobs to buy, pointing his finger at me like I was some stranger who had overstayed her welcome. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled. My name is Francisco Martinez. I'm 67 years old, and I want to tell you how my own family turned my dream home into my personal prison, how they invaded my space, treated me like their personal maid, and tried to throw me out like garbage. But most importantly, I want to tell you how I turned the tables and showed them what real justice looks like. It was a Tuesday morning in March when everything came crashing down. I was standing in my own kitchen. The kitchen I had renovated with my retirement savings. The kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals for my ungrateful family. And my 34-year-old son Ricardo was screaming at me because I had dared to use his coffee maker. "This is MY house now, Mom. You need to understand your place here." His place? His place? I had signed that house over to him just 6 months earlier, thinking I was securing my family's future, thinking I was being a good mother. The paperwork was supposed to protect me, guarantee me a home for life. But lawyers' words on paper mean nothing when your own blood turns against you. Standing behind him was my daughter-in-law, Patricia, smirking with that cruel smile I had learned to hate, holding my 4-year-old grandson's hand. Lil Miguel, who I used to babysit every day while they worked, now looked at me like I was the enemy because that's what his parents had taught him. "Grandma is old and smelly," he said, repeating the words they had poisoned his innocent mind with. She should go to the old people's home. I felt my heart break into 1,000 pieces right there in that kitchen. The kitchen where I had taught Ricardo to cook when he was 8 years old. The kitchen where I had baked his birthday cakes for 34 years. The kitchen where I had spent my last cent making sure he never went hungry. But you know what? Sometimes when your heart breaks, it doesn't just shatter, it transforms. And in that moment, looking at the family I had sacrificed everything for, I felt something new growing inside me. Not just hurt, not just sadness, but a cold, calculating determination. They thought I was just a weak old woman they could push around. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Let me take you back to understand how I ended up in this nightmare. Because the story of how I lost my home starts with the story of how I built it in the first place. 25 years ago, I was a single mother working as a hotel housekeeper during the day, a restaurant cleaner at night, and doing alterations for neighbors on weekends. My husband had abandoned us when Ricardo was just 9, leaving me with nothing but bills and a broken heart. But I had dreams. Every night, after my son fell asleep, I would sit at our tiny kitchen table and sketch house plans on the backs of envelopes. I dreamed of a real home, with a garden where Ricardo could play, with enough bedrooms for him to have friends over, with a kitchen big enough to cook proper family meals. For 15 years, I saved every penny. I wore the same 3 dresses to work and church. I never bought anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. When Ricardo needed new shoes, I would go without lunch for a week. When he wanted a bicycle for his birthday, I worked double shifts for 3 months. The house I finally bought wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect to me. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with an island, and a small backyard with space for tomatoes and flowers. I remember the day I got the keys. I cried for 2 hours, just sitting in the empty living room, touching the walls that were finally, truly mine. Ricardo was 24 then, just graduated from college. The college I had paid for with those same 3 jobs. He hugged me that day and said, "Mom, you're incredible. I'm going to take care of you forever." Forever lasted exactly 9 years. The trouble started when he married Patricia 3 years ago. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Long black hair, perfect makeup, designer clothes that cost more than my monthly salary. She worked in marketing for some big company and made it clear from day one that she thought Ricardo had married down by being my son. At first, the signs were small. Patricia would wrinkle her nose when she entered my house, as if something smelled bad. She would move my decorations around without asking, saying she was updating the look. She started bringing her own toilet paper when they visited, claiming mine was too rough. But I ignored it all because Ricardo seemed happy, and I thought that's what mattered. Then came the suggestion. They had been married 2 years, and Patricia was pregnant with Miguel. They were renting a small apartment across town, but the rent kept going up, and they were struggling to save for a house. "Mom," Ricardo said one evening over dinner, "Patricia and I have been talking. What if we moved in here temporarily, just until we save enough for our own place? It would help us, and you wouldn't be alone in this big house." Patricia added, with that fake sweet voice she used when she wanted something, "And I could help you with the housework, Francisca. It must be so hard maintaining everything at your age." My age. I was 65 and could still outwork most people half my age, but apparently that made me a decrepit old woman in her eyes. I should have said no. Every instinct in my body screamed no. But this was my son, my only child, the person I had sacrificed everything for. And they were giving me a grandchild. "Of course," I said. "Family takes care of family." The first red flag should have been how quickly they moved in. Within a week, they had transferred their lease, packed all their belongings, and filled my home with their things. Patricia immediately claimed the master bedroom, saying pregnant women needed more space. I moved to the smallest bedroom, the one that had been Ricardo's when he was a child. The second red flag was how they started treating my house like their house immediately. Patricia rearranged my furniture, painted over my carefully chosen colors without asking, and threw away decorations I collected over decades, calling them dated clutter. But the third red flag was the worst. How quickly they made me feel like a guest in my own home. The transformation from temporary arrangement to full takeover happened gradually, like a slow-acting poison. At first, Patricia would ask sweetly if she could borrow my car to run errands while hers was in the shop. Then her car was mysteriously always in the shop, and my car became the family car that I had to ask permission to use. She started doing the grocery shopping, saying she knew better what healthy foods a baby needed. Somehow, the grocery money I gave her never seemed to buy anything I actually wanted to eat. My coffee was replaced with her expensive organic brand. My soap was replaced with her designer products that gave me rashes. "We're trying to create a healthier environment for Miguel," she would say whenever I complained. "I hope you understand." The bills started coming to their names. First the electric company, then the water company, then the internet. When I asked about it, Ricardo explained they were helping me manage my finances better. "At your age, Mom, it's easy to get confused with all these different accounts. We're just making sure nothing gets missed." But I wasn't confused. I had been managing my own finances perfectly well for decades. I started keeping careful records of every change they made, writing everything down in a small notebook I hid under my mattress. The notebook filled up quickly. March 15th. Patricia threw away my coffee maker, saying it was unsanitary. Bought a new expensive one that she keeps in her kitchen cabinet. March 22nd. Found all my family photos removed from the living room, replaced with professional photos of Patricia's family. March 28th. They changed the locks, saying it was for security. Gave me one key, but told me to check with them before having friends over. April 3rd. Patricia started going through my mail, saying she was helping me organize important documents. April 10th. Found legal papers in Ricardo's room about updating property ownership for tax purposes. That last entry made my blood run cold. I waited until they were both out of the house, then searched Ricardo's room more thoroughly. Hidden in a folder marked tax documents were papers from a lawyer's office, papers about transferring property ownership, papers with my signature that I didn't remember signing. My hand shook as I read through page after page of legal language I didn't fully understand, but some phrases jumped out clearly. Transfer of ownership, life estate arrangement, remainder interest to Ricardo Martinez. I had given them my house. Legally, officially, completely. But when? How? I racked my brain trying to remember. Then it came back to me 6 months ago, when Patricia was in the hospital having complications with her pregnancy. Ricardo had come to me crying, saying they needed help with medical bills, that he was afraid they might lose their apartment. Mom, my lawyer friend says if you put the house in my name, we can get better financing options. It's just paperwork. You'll still live here forever. It's just to help us get through this tough time. I had been so worried about Patricia and the baby, so focused on wanting to help, that I had signed without reading carefully. I trusted my son completely. Now I understood the truth. There had been no medical crisis. There had been no financial emergency. It had all been a carefully planned trap to steal my house. And the worst part? I had walked right into it with my eyes wide open. That night, I lay in my tiny bedroom, the bedroom that was no longer even mine, listening to them laugh in the living room while they watched TV on the expensive new system they had bought with money that should have been mine. They were planning their future in my house, and that future clearly didn't include me. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought I was just a weak old woman who would quietly accept whatever they decided to do to me. They had no idea that the woman who had worked 3 jobs for 15 years to buy this house wasn't going to give up without a fight. The morning I overheard their real plan, I finally understood just how deep their betrayal went. I was in the garden, tending to my tomatoes, one of the few spaces they hadn't yet claimed as their own, when I heard their voices through the kitchen window. They thought I had gone to the store, but I had forgotten my purse and come back early. The lawyer says we can start the process next month. Patricia was saying, once we establish she's become a burden and can't properly care for herself, we can get guardianship and move her to one of those senior living places. Are you sure that will work? Ricardo's voice, my own son's voice, sounded excited rather than concerned. Trust me, baby. My cousin works at Sunset Manor. It's not the worst place, and it's only $2,800 a month. Way less than what we're spending taking care of her here. $2,800 a month. They were talking about my life, my future, like I was a financial burden they needed to dispose of. But what if she fights it? Patricia laughed. That cruel sound I had learned to hate. What's she going to fight with? She doesn't have money for a lawyer. She signed over the house to you. She has no leverage. Besides, look at the evidence we've been building. Evidence? What evidence? The photos of her forgetting to clean up after herself. The documentation of her confusion about bills and finances. Miguel's testimony about how scary grandma has become. Dr. Martinez's notes about her increasing memory issues. My heart stopped. Dr. Martinez was Patricia's uncle, the family doctor they had insisted I start seeing 6 months ago. The same doctor who had been asking me strange questions during my visits. Questions about whether I felt confused or overwhelmed managing my daily tasks. They had been building a case against me. Every helpful gesture, every time they took over one of my responsibilities, every time they documented my supposed confusion, it had all been preparation for this moment. The best part, Patricia continued, is that once she's in the care facility, we can sell this place and buy something better. Somewhere without all her old lady decorations and that ridiculous garden. Maybe one of those new developments with the pool and tennis courts. They wanted to erase every trace of me. Not just get rid of me, but destroy everything I had built, everything I had loved about the home I had sacrificed decades to create. When do we tell her? Ricardo asked. We don't tell her anything until the papers are signed. Let her think she's safe until it's too late to do anything about it. The appointment with the guardianship lawyer is next Tuesday. By the end of the month, she'll be somebody else's problem. I stood there in my garden, surrounded by the tomatoes I had planted with my own hands, feeling the earth crumble beneath my feet. Not literally, but spiritually. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my future, gone. But as I stood there in shock, something else began to grow alongside the devastation. A cold, clear understanding of what I was really dealing with. These weren't misguided family members who had lost their way. These were predators who had systematically planned to destroy my life for their own benefit. They had underestimated me completely. They saw a lonely old woman who could be easily manipulated and discarded. They had no idea that the same determination that had built this house in the first place was about to be turned against them. I had been playing defense for months, reacting to their moves, trying to keep the peace, hoping things would get better. But defense doesn't win wars. It was time to go on the offense. That night, I sat in my small bedroom and made a list, not a list of grievances or complaints, but a battle plan. I had exactly 1 week before their lawyer appointment. 1 week to save my life, my home, and my dignity. They thought they held all the cards because they had legal ownership of my house. But they had forgotten something important. I had lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. I had relationships, reputation, and resources they knew nothing about. Most importantly, I had something they would never have, the moral authority of someone who had been wronged and the focused rage of someone who had nothing left to lose. The war for my life was about to begin. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned. By dawn, I had filled 12 pages with strategies, resources, and step-by-step actions. The scared, confused old woman they thought they were dealing with was gone. In her place was the same strategic thinker who had juggled 3 jobs while raising a child alone, who had saved every penny for 15 years to buy this house, who had survived every challenge life had thrown at her. My first call was to Mrs. Rodriguez next door. Elena and I had been friends for 18 years. She was retired from her job as a paralegal, and more importantly, she had witnessed every moment of Ricardo and Patricia's transformation of my life. "Francisca, I've been waiting for you to call," she said when I explained the situation. "Roberto and I have been watching what they're doing to you, and we're furious. How can we help?" Elena became my intelligence coordinator. She knew exactly which neighbors had seen what, who had evidence of my competence and independence, and most importantly, who had connections to legal resources I could afford. There's a lawyer 3 blocks over, Sarah Chun. She handles elder abuse cases on a sliding scale. She also happens to be the daughter of Mr. Chun, who owns the grocery store where you've shopped for 20 years. He speaks very highly of you. By noon, I had an appointment with Sarah Chun for the next morning. But I knew legal action alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to document everything, and I needed to do it in a way that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. That's where Miguel came in. Not my grandson, but Miguel Santos, Elena's nephew who worked as a private investigator. For $500, money I withdrew from the small emergency account Patricia, and Ricardo didn't know about, Miguel agreed to do a complete investigation of my situation. "Mrs. Martinez," he said when we met at Elena's house, "what they're doing to you is called financial elder abuse, and it's a felony in this state. But we need solid evidence that shows both the abuse and your competence to live independently." Over the next 3 days, Miguel helped me gather everything we needed. Professional photographs of me managing my garden, cooking complex meals, organizing my finances, and handling household maintenance, all time-stamped and dated to counter their claims of incompetence. Recordings of conversations where Patricia and Ricardo discussed their plans, completely legal in our state, since it was happening in my own home. Financial records showing that I had been handling my money perfectly well until they took over, and that the confusion about bills had started only after they began intercepting my mail. Medical records from my previous doctor showing 20 years of perfect cognitive assessments, contrasted with the suspicious recent notes from Patricia's uncle. Witness statements from neighbors, store clerks, and service providers who could testify to my independence and competence. But the most important piece of evidence came from Ricardo himself. On Thursday evening, while they thought I was at my senior exercise class, actually me with my legal team, Miguel's partner Sophia posed as a real estate agent and called Patricia about potential opportunities for your beautiful property. Patricia, thinking she was talking to a legitimate agent, revealed everything: the planned timeline for getting rid of me, the specific care facility they had chosen, their intention to sell the house immediately after gaining guardianship, even their backup plan if I became difficult. "We've been planning this for over a year," Patricia bragged to the fake agent. "The old woman has no idea what's coming. By next month, we'll have complete control of a $400,000 asset." Sophia recorded every word, but I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was also laying traps. On Friday, I had Elena help me draft a letter to Patricia's employer, explaining that I was concerned about some confusion regarding legal documents and needed to verify Patricia's employment status and income for insurance purposes. The letter was deliberately vague but official sounding. The response revealed something beautiful. Patricia had been lying to her company about her living situation. She had been claiming a housing allowance for caring for an elderly relative, collecting an extra $800 per month by pretending to be my caregiver. That was fraud. Corporate fraud, tax fraud, and benefit fraud all rolled into one. By Sunday night, exactly 1 week after I had overheard their plan, I had assembled a complete case file. Legal documents proving the house transfer had been obtained through deception. Financial records showing their systematic theft of my resources. Audio recordings revealing their conspiracy to have me declared incompetent. Witness testimony establishing my competence and their abuse. And most importantly, I had leverage they never saw coming. The meeting with their guardianship lawyer was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. But my meeting with my lawyer was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. They thought they were hunting prey. They had no idea the prey had become the predator. And you, what would you do in this person's place? I would love to hear your opinion. So please share it with me in the comments. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, perfectly matching my mood. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because I was nervous, but because I was ready after a week of careful planning. Today was execution day. I dressed carefully in my best navy blue dress, the one I had worn to Ricardo's college graduation. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a competent, dignified woman who deserved respect, not the confused old burden they had painted me as. At exactly 8 a.m., I walked into Sarah Chen's office, carrying a manila folder thick with evidence. Sarah was a small woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and even sharper reputation for protecting elderly clients. Mrs. Martinez, she said after reviewing my documentation, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder abuse I've seen in 15 years of practice. Your son and daughter-in-law have committed multiple felonies. Are you prepared for what happens when we file these charges? I'm prepared for justice. I replied, what are our options? We have several paths. Criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. Civil action to reverse the property transfer. Restraining orders for harassment. And my personal favorite, an emergency hearing to establish your competence and their unfitness as guardians, scheduled for exactly the same time as their appointment with their lawyer. At 9:30 a.m., Sarah and I walked into the courthouse while Ricardo and Patricia were sitting in their lawyer's office 3 blocks away, probably discussing how to spend the money from selling my house. The emergency hearing took exactly 45 minutes. Judge Martinez, no relation to me, but family court judge with 30 years of experience, reviewed our evidence methodically. The audio recordings where Patricia bragged about defrauding her employer and planning to institutionalize me played through the courtroom speakers. The financial records showing systematic theft were projected on screens. The witness statements from neighbors, doctors, and business owners were read into the record. Mrs. Martinez. Judge Martinez said, when the evidence presentation was complete, you appear to be one of the most competent elderly people I've encountered in my courtroom. The evidence suggests you've been the victim of a sophisticated scheme to defraud you of your property and independence. At 10:15 a.m., exactly 15 minutes after Ricardo and Patricia were supposed to meet with their guardianship lawyer, the courthouse clerk called them to inform them that an emergency hearing had been scheduled regarding their case. I watched in the courthouse steps as they arrived in confusion and panic. Patricia was still carrying her designer purse and wearing the expensive jewelry she had bought with money that should have been mine. Ricardo looked exactly like what he was, a man who had just realized his careful plans were falling apart. But the real show began at 2 p.m. when the sheriff's deputy arrived at my house, legally my house again as of the morning hearing, with a notice of eviction for Ricardo, Patricia, and their children. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises, the deputy informed them as I stood in my garden, calmly watering my tomatoes. This property has been restored to its rightful owner under the Elder Abuse Protection Statutes. Patricia's reaction was everything I had hoped for. She screamed. She threatened to call her lawyer. She demanded to know how I could afford legal representation. She accused me of being senile and incompetent, which was particularly ironic given that I had just been legally certified as completely competent by a family court judge. This is impossible, she shrieked. She signed over the house. It's ours. Ma'am, the deputy replied patiently. Contracts obtained through fraud are void. The court has ruled that Mrs. Martinez was deceived about the nature and consequences of the document she signed. The property transfer has been reversed. But I wasn't done. I had spent 7 days planning this moment, and I wasn't going to waste the opportunity for complete justice. As Patricia continued to rant and threaten, I calmly handed the deputy a second set of papers. These are fraud charges related to Ms. Patricia Martinez's false claims to her employer. I explained. She's been collecting housing assistance benefits for caring for an elderly relative, while actually financially abusing that relative. Patricia's face went white, in her anger about the house. She had forgotten about the employment fraud Miguel had uncovered. The deputy looked at the new papers, then at Patricia. "Ma'am, you're going to need to come with me to answer some questions about these fraud allegations." That's when Ricardo finally spoke up. "Mom, please, can't we work this out? We're family." Family. The word that had got me into this mess in the first place. "Family doesn't steal from family," I replied. "Family doesn't lie to family. Family doesn't plan to throw family away like garbage when they're no longer useful." I looked at my 4-year-old grandson, standing behind his parents with confused eyes. He was innocent in all this, just a child who had been taught to treat his grandmother badly. "Miguel," I said gently, "do you remember when you used to help me plant tomatoes? When you said you wanted to live with Grandma forever?" He nodded, tears forming in his little eyes. "Well, maybe someday when you're older, if your parents learn how to be respectful and kind, you can visit Grandma again. But right now, they need to learn some very important lessons about treating people with respect." As Patricia was led away in handcuffs for questioning about the employment fraud, and Ricardo loaded their belongings into a rental truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not satisfaction from revenge, though that was certainly part of it, but real peace, the kind that comes from standing up for yourself and refusing to be a victim. My house was mine again. My dignity was restored. My future was secure. But more importantly, I had learned something valuable about my own strength. I was not a helpless old woman who needed other people to make decisions for her. I was a survivor, a fighter, and someone who deserved respect. The 72 hours passed quickly, but the aftermath lasted much longer. Patricia's arrest made the local news. Marketing executive charged with elder abuse and employment fraud read the headline in Thursday's paper. Her employer fired her immediately, not just for fraudulent housing claims, but for the liability exposure her criminal charges created for the company. Ricardo called me Thursday night from a hotel where they were staying with the children. "Mom, please, this has gone too far. Patricia made mistakes, but did you have to destroy her whole career?" "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly. "Patricia destroyed her own career when she chose to commit fraud. Actions have consequences. Ricardo, it's something I thought I had taught you when you were young. But what about the kids? Miguel keeps asking why Grandma sent Mommy to jail. What am I supposed to tell him? Tell him the truth. Tell him that Grandma stood up for herself when people were treating her badly. Tell him that lying and stealing are wrong, even when family members do it." There was a long silence on the phone. "Mom, I never wanted it to go this far. Patricia convinced me that you were getting confused, that you needed help managing things. I thought we were helping you. Did you think you were helping me when you planned to put me in a nursing home against my will? Did you think you were helping me when you discussed selling my house while I was still living in it?" Another silence. "How did you know about that?" "I know about everything. Ricardo, the fake medical assessments from Patricia's uncle, the lies to the guardianship lawyer, the plan to declare me incompetent, the timeline for getting rid of me. All of it." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. But what do you want us to do now? We have nowhere to go. Patricia can't get another job with criminal charges pending. The kids are asking questions I can't answer." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He sounded lost, desperate, like the little boy who used to come to me with skinned knees and broken toys. But then I remembered his voice in my kitchen that morning a week ago. "Get out of my kitchen. You're just a burden here now." "What I want," I said carefully, "is for you to understand that your actions created this situation. I want you to take responsibility instead of blaming everyone else. And I want you to figure out how to rebuild your life without stealing from other people. Are you allowed to come back? Ever? It was a question I had been dreading, because I didn't have a simple answer. That depends entirely on you, Ricardo. If you can learn to treat me with respect, if you can acknowledge what you did wrong, if you can prove that you understand why it was wrong, then maybe we can rebuild our relationship. But it will be a very different relationship than before. What do you mean? I mean that I will never again sign legal documents because you asked me to. I will never again give up control of my finances or my property. I will never again allow anyone to treat me like a burden or an inconvenience in my own home. If you can accept those boundaries, then we can talk about rebuilding trust. If you can't, then we have nothing more to discuss. The neighbors were incredibly supportive. Elena brought me homemade tamales and stayed for tea every afternoon that week, making sure I wasn't lonely in my newly empty house. Mr. Chun from the grocery store told everyone who would listen about how proud he was that I had stood up for myself. Even my mail carrier, who had noticed Patricia intercepted my mail, stopped by to congratulate me. Mrs. Martinez, he said, I've been delivering mail for 23 years, and what your family was doing to you was one of the worst things I've ever seen. I'm so glad you found a way to fight back. But the most meaningful support came from an unexpected source. Other elderly people in my neighborhood who had heard about my case. Mrs. Thompson from 2 Streets overcalled to tell me that her own daughter had been pressuring her to sign over her house for tax purposes. After hearing my story, she had consulted with a lawyer and discovered that her daughter had been planning a similar scheme. Mr. Williams, a widower who lived alone 4 blocks away, came by to thank me. His son had been gradually taking control of his finances, claiming it was to help him avoid confusion. My example had given him the courage to take back control of his own money. Within 2 weeks, Sarah Chin told me she had received calls from 6 different elderly people who had heard about my case and realized they were being financially abused by their own families. Francisca, she said during our follow-up meeting, your courage to fight back has started something much bigger than just your own case. You've shown other people that they don't have to be victims. The criminal case against Patricia moved forward quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, and her lawyer advised her to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a trial. She pleaded guilty to employment fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges. Her sentence included restitution payments to both me and her former employer, Community Service, and 3 years of probation. More importantly for my peace of mind, the plea bargain included a stipulation that she could have no contact with me for 5 years and could never again attempt to gain any legal authority over my affairs. Ricardo wasn't charged criminally, but he faced his own consequences. As the person who had actually received the fraudulently transferred property, he was liable for civil damages. My lawyer calculated that between the legal costs they had forced me to incur, the financial losses from the control of my accounts, and emotional distress damages, Ricardo owed me approximately $47,000. I don't have that kind of money, Mom, he said when the civil judgment was entered. Then I guess you'll be making payments for a very long time. I replied, maybe that will give you time to think about why stealing from your mother was such a terrible idea. By the end of the month, my house was quiet again. My garden was thriving. My bills were back in my name and current. My neighbors treated me with a new level of respect, not just as a sweet lady next door, but as someone who had fought for her rights and won. But the best part was the silence. No more criticism about my cooking. No more demands that I ask permission to use my own car. No more conversations about my supposed incompetence happening in my own living room. Just peace, dignity, and the satisfaction of knowing that I had refused to be a victim. 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden on a beautiful Saturday morning, drinking coffee from my old coffee maker, the one Patricia had thrown away but I had retrieved from a neighbor's house, when the phone rang. Mrs. Martinez? This is Jennifer Walsh from Senior Living Solutions. We specialize in helping elderly people maintain their independence in their own homes. We heard about your situation through your lawyer, and we'd like to offer you a consulting position. A consulting position. At 67, after everything I had been through, someone wanted to pay me for my expertise. What kind of consulting? I asked. We work with elderly clients who are facing pressure from family members to give up their independence. We need someone who understands both the emotional and legal aspects of these situations. Someone who has been through it themselves and can help others navigate these difficult family dynamics. I started working with Jennifer's company the following month. My first client was Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor who had called me about her daughter's scheme. Together, we developed a plan to protect her assets while maintaining her relationship with her daughter. It wasn't easy, but 6 weeks later, Mrs. Thompson was still living independently in her own home, and her daughter had agreed to family counseling to address her financial demands. My second client was an 80-year-old man whose son was trying to force him into a nursing home so he could sell the family farm. By the time we finished working together, the son had backed down, and the client had established legal protections that would prevent any future attempts to force him out of his home. Francisca, Jennifer told me after my third successful case, "You have a gift for this work. You understand these families in a way that social workers and lawyers sometimes can't. You know what it feels like to be betrayed by people you trust, and you also know what it takes to fight back." The work was more rewarding than anything I had done in years. Not just financially, though the consulting fees were excellent, but emotionally. Every client I helped was another elderly person who would keep their dignity, their independence, and their security. Ricardo called me in August, 6 months after the eviction. "Mom, I've been in therapy. Patricia and I are separated. She's staying with her mother while she completes her community service, and I have temporary custody of the kids. How are Miguel and Sophia?" I asked, genuinely concerned about my grandchildren despite everything that had happened. "They're confused, but they're okay. Miguel asks about you sometimes. He remembers helping you in the garden." "And what do you tell him?" I tell him the truth, that Daddy and Mommy made some very bad choices, and that Grandma had to protect herself, that we hurt someone we love very much, and now we had to work very hard to earn her trust back. It was the first time Ricardo had taken full responsibility for his actions without making excuses or blaming someone else. "The therapist says I have a lot of issues with money and entitlement that probably started when I was young," he continued. "She says that watching you work so hard to provide for me might have made me feel like I deserved things without working for them myself. What do you think about that?" I think she's right. I think I got so used to you sacrificing for me that I started to believe your whole purpose in life was to make things easier for me, even when it meant destroying your own life. There was a long pause on the phone. I could hear children playing in the background, my grandchildren, who had been caught in the middle of this mess through no fault of their own. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but would you consider meeting with my therapist and me? Not to reconcile necessarily, but to help me understand how badly I hurt you? She says it might help me make sure I never do anything like this again." I thought about it for a long moment. The old me, the people pleaser who had always put family harmony above her own needs, would have said yes immediately, but I was no longer that woman. "I'll consider it," I said finally, "but I have conditions." "Anything. First, you continue therapy for at least a year, whether we meet or not. Second, you keep making your restitution payments on time. Third, you get a job and start supporting your children properly instead of looking for shortcuts. And fourth, if we do meet, Patricia is not involved in any way until she completes her legal obligations and demonstrates genuine remorse for what she did." "I understand. And Mom, thank you for not giving up on me completely." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen in my house, surrounded by my things, and thought about forgiveness. Not the cheap kind that pretends hurt never happened, but the real kind that acknowledges damage while choosing to leave room for redemption. I wasn't ready to forgive yet. Maybe I never would be completely, but I was open to the possibility that people could change if they were willing to do the hard work of facing their mistakes honestly. In September, I used some of my consulting income to take a vacation. My first real vacation in 25 years. I spent 2 weeks in Colorado, staying in a beautiful mountain resort, hiking gentle trails, and reading books by a fireplace every evening. For the first time in my adult life, I was spending money on myself without guilt, without wondering if I should be saving it for someone else's emergency instead. The freedom was intoxicating. I also used some of the money to renovate my house exactly the way I wanted it. I painted the walls in colors I loved, not colors chosen to please other people. I bought furniture that was comfortable for me, not impressive to visitors. I planted flowers in my garden that I enjoyed, not vegetables I felt obligated to share. It sounds selfish, but it wasn't. It was self-respect. It was recognizing that my needs, my preferences, and my happiness mattered as much as anyone else's. By October, I had helped 12 elderly clients protect themselves from financial abuse. Jennifer offered me a promotion to senior consultant with my own office and a substantial salary increase. Francisca, you become our most requested consultant. Clients specifically ask for you because they know you've been where they are. You give them hope that they can survive and thrive after family betrayal. The work had given me something I hadn't expected, a new sense of purpose. For decades, my purpose had been taking care of Ricardo, making sure he had everything he needed to succeed. When he turned against me, I felt like my entire reason for existing had been destroyed. But now I had a different purpose. I was helping people who faced the same betrayal I had faced. I was using my hard-won wisdom to protect others from becoming victims. Every client who kept their independence was a victory not just for them, but for all elderly people who deserved respect and dignity. In November, Miguel called me. My 4-year-old grandson had figured out how to use his father's phone. Grandma Francisca, I miss you. Daddy says you're mad at us. My heart broke and healed at the same time hearing his little voice. I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. I love you very much. I'm disappointed in some choices your parents made, but that has nothing to do with how much I love you. Can I come visit you? I want to see your tomatoes. Maybe someday soon, Miguel. Your daddy and I are working on figuring out how to be a family again. It takes time when people hurt each other. Okay, I love you, Grandma. I love you too, baby. After that call, I made a decision. I called Ricardo and told him I was ready to meet with him and his therapist. Not because I had forgiven him completely, not because I was ready to pretend nothing had happened, but because I wanted to give my grandchildren the chance to have their grandmother in their lives. The meeting was scheduled for December 15th, exactly 9 months after that terrible morning in my kitchen when this whole nightmare had started. But this time, I would be walking into that meeting as a different person, not as a victim who could be manipulated and discarded, but as a survivor who had fought for her dignity and won. Not as a lonely old woman desperate for family approval, but as a successful professional who would build a new life on her own terms. Whether Ricardo had truly changed remained to be seen. Whether our relationship could be rebuilt was an open question. But regardless of what happened with my son, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again allow anyone to treat me like I was disposable. I had learned my worth, and I would never forget it. As I finished writing these words, sitting in my beautiful home office, the room that used to be Patricia's walk-in closet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just satisfaction or revenge or even peace, though I felt all of those things. I felt proud of myself, proud of my courage, proud of my intelligence, proud of my refusal to be a victim, proud of the woman who had worked 3 jobs to buy this house, and proud of the woman who had fought to keep it. Most importantly, I felt hopeful about the future, not because I believed everything would be perfect, but because I now knew that whatever challenges came my way, I had the strength and wisdom to handle them. I was no longer someone things happened to. I was someone who made things happen. And that I realized was the best revenge of all. Epilogue. If you like my story, you can support me by making a donation so I can write more stories. Thank you in advance. For more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you. 1 year later, I'm still living independently in my beautiful home. My consulting business has expanded to 3 states, and I've helped over 50 elderly clients protect themselves from financial abuse. Ricardo and I meet monthly with his therapist. It's slow work, rebuilding trust that was so completely shattered, but we're making progress. He's maintained steady employment for 8 months now and has never missed a restitution payment. Patricia completed her community service and moved to another state. I heard through the neighborhood network that she's working as a waitress and struggling to rebuild her life. I feel no satisfaction in her hardships, but I also feel no guilt about the consequences of her choices. Most importantly, I see my grandchildren regularly now. Miguel, now 5, is my eager assistant in the garden every Sunday afternoon. His little sister, Sophia, who was barely walking when this all started, calls me Gamma and runs to hug me every time she sees me. They're learning important lessons about respect, honesty, and treating people with kindness. They're also learning that their grandmother is not a helpless old woman, but a strong, capable person who deserves to be treated with dignity. Sometimes at night, I walk through my house, every room truly mine again, and think about all the elderly people who aren't as fortunate as I was. People who don't have helpful neighbors like Elena, or lawyers like Sarah Chun, or the financial resources to fight back against family members who abuse their trust. That's why I continue the consulting work. Even though I'm financially secure now, every person I help is a victory against the assumption that elderly people are helpless victims who should be grateful for whatever treatment they receive from their families. We are not disposable. We are not burdens. We are not confused old people who need others to make decisions for us. We are survivors, fighters, and valuable members of society who deserve respect, dignity, and the right to control our own lives. And if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, well, they might just find out that this grandmother knows how to fight back. The end. Property protector, protecting what's yours.